spheres face systemic repression. Arbitrary detentions, ill treatment, torture, and violence against women have unfortunately become commonplace. We support all efforts towards a negotiated, peaceful solution to the crisis. At the same time, we urge the Nicaraguan government to fully comply with its obligations under international human rights law and establish an enabling environment for the protection and advancement of all fundamental and human rights. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ireland aligns with the statement of the European Union. We thank the group of human rights experts for its report and commend its ongoing work in investigating all alleged human rights violations and abuses committed in Nicaragua. Ireland remains deeply concerned by the human rights situation in Nicaragua, which has deteriorated further in the last year. We condemn the arbitrary detention of those exercising their right to freedom of expression and the reprisals against those former political prisoners and dissidents living in exile, including the denationalization of such individuals. We call on Nicaragua to uphold its international human rights obligations and to end its repression against dissenting voices, civil society organizations, and religious institutions. We further call on the Nicaraguan authorities to release all remaining political prisoners. We deeply regret Nicaragua's announcement that they would disengage from the Human Rights Council. Ireland urges the Nicaraguan authorities to re-engage with international human rights mechanisms, such as the UN Group of Human Rights Experts and the Office of the High Commissioner, and to ensure a safe and enabling environment for all human rights defenders. Mr. Simon, could you discuss the impact that the denationalization of individuals has had on Nicaraguans living in exile? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Yesterday, Nicaragua declared that it is leaving this council. We want to make it clear that this will not change the need to hold the authorities accountable for the suppression of human rights in Nicaragua. In this spirit, we welcome the report of the group of human rights experts on Nicaragua. We're alarmed by its findings, including further reports of extrajudicial killings and arbitrary detention. We're concerned that authorities have used physical and psychological violence, including threats, rape, beatings and prolonged solitary confinement against those who participated in the 2018 protests and against individuals who have been accused of publicly criticising the authorities. In addition, the approval of the wide-ranging constitutional amendments passed on 30th of January undermine the separation of the powers of the state and mark a further tragic development in the dismantling of the rule of law in Nicaragua. Moreover, the increase in reports of transnational repression, including intimidation and harassment of Nicaraguans in exile, represents a further attack on human rights. The ongoing limitation of Nicaraguans' civil, political and other human rights is unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Thank you, President. The report presented to the Council today and the activities of the mechanism itself, which was set up without consent from Nicaragua, undermines opportunities for dialogue and cooperation in the sphere of human rights. In November 2024, Nicaragua successfully presented its national human rights efforts under the current UPR cycle. The UPR process has highlighted the undisputed achievements of the country in ensuring the rights of women, enhancing the quality and availability of education, combating trafficking in persons, social support to vulnerable groups, and other areas. These results were achieved in spite of the ongoing unlawful pressure on the country in the form of economic sanctions and other UCMs. The practice of politicization, selectivity, and double standards prevalent in the HRC towards Nicaragua and other developing countries takes a lamentable toll on the work of the HRC, which is steadily losing its authority. We view Nicaragua's decision to reject activity within this council. We view condemnation of this rather as a deep sign of lack of respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Give the floor to the distinguished representative of Georgia.
And we thank the group of human rights experts for the latest report. Georgia remains alarmed over the deteriorating human rights situation in Nicaragua, exacerbated by a multifaceted crisis and significant decline in civil and political rights. We deplore the pervasive and systematic abuses of human rights, encompassing arbitrary detentions and killings, torture and ill treatment, along with infringements of the rights of freedom of expression, association and assembly. We deeply regret the recent constitutional reform, which has entered into force in February and represents a further step away from the rule of law, in total disregard of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Furthermore, The ever-growing tendency of persecution of individuals and organizations viewed as adversaries of Ortega and Murillo regime remain a serious concern. As a result of these repressive actions, human rights advocates, religious and community leaders, and members of the independent media and NGOs continue to suffer from grave human rights violations. Georgia reaffirms its solidarity with the people of Nicaragua in their relentless pursuit of peaceful resolution of the ongoing socio-political crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
Apologies, technical difficulties. Thank you, President. We'd like to thank the group of human rights experts for their update. New Zealand joins others in expressing our strongest concern at the ongoing violation of human rights in Nicaragua, including increasingly severe restrictions on free and democratic expression and political participation. We're deeply concerned by the arbitrary deprivation of nationality, the increase in political prisoners, instances of torture, sexual violence, and the repression of civil society, religious, ethnic minority, and Indigenous peoples. These instances of repression are taking place against the backdrop of concerning new laws that further limit fundamental freedoms. We remain concerned by Nicaragua's continued failure to respect its international human rights obligations, including its failure to engage with international bodies mandated to monitor human rights. We urge Nicaragua to re-engage with the Human Rights Council and to engage with the recommendations made by the group of experts in their most recent report. We would welcome the views of the experts on how democratic opposition and human rights defenders can be protected from further persecution in Nicaragua. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Thank you, President. The Republic of Nicaragua's withdrawal from the Human Rights Council should serve as a wake-up call for this body. How many times have the countries of the Global South spoken up to denounce the politicization, the bias and the double standards in addressing topics related to human rights? How many times have we denounced the use of the human rights institutions, this body, as a weapon wielded to destabilize countries or a politicized tool to bring about political regime change? How many times have we spoken up to question the allocating of scarce and precious resources for mandates imposed by this council and whose results have been almost non-existent when it comes to cooperation and boosting same for human rights? Perhaps Western countries do not wish to wake up to the reality that maintaining such a course of action, far from strengthening, is weakening this institution and its credibility. This body lives or dies by its credibility and the trust that everybody reposes in its impartiality. This council, unfortunately, has failed to uphold those hopes pinned in it. We respect the sovereign decision of Nicaragua to withdraw from this council, and we hope that this decision will contribute to this council taking time to reflect on its role and the future of human rights. Nicaragua left the Human Rights Council, or was it the Human Rights Council that left Nicaragua? That's the question that needs to be answered. I fear that the spectre of the defunct Human Rights Commission has begun to stalk this chamber. Thank you very much, President.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Argentina.
Thank you, President. Our thanks also go to the group of experts for the presentation of their report, which underscores once again the worsening human rights situation in Nicaragua. In the oral update, the Office of the High Commissioner deplored the fact that in Nicaragua a severe and repressive climate prevails, and they sounded the alarm on the serious impact of the ongoing constitutional reform, or ongoing at that time. A few weeks ago said unprecedented reform was enacted and sounded the death knell for the rule of law and the point of no return in the path towards the consolidation of power solely in the hands of the presidential family. The division of powers that was purely fictitious rather than factual is now definitely a thing of the past. The measures and actions undertaken by the Nicaraguan government have severely undermined the right to life, freedom and property of Nicaraguans. The principle of non-interference in internal affairs is wielded as a pretext, used as a shield to hide from view the most aberrant crimes committed against political opponents, against critics and against persons linked to the Catholic Church, encompassing acts of torture, forced disappearances and the complete catalogue of the violations of the most fundamental human rights. For all of the aforementioned reasons, we reaffirm that what should actually prevail is the principle of states not remaining indifferent to such abuses. President, we believe that it's vital that we renew the mandate of the group of experts and the OHCHR. We have not lost all hope that the government of Nicaragua will choose to heed the voice of this council, which, with a few regrettable exceptions, speaks with one voice, calling on the government to once and for all care for and protect their very own citizens, those who are prepared to lay down their own lives and the well-being of their own children for the good of their future generations and the nation itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, colleagues. Ambassador, this is no disrespect, but I had a meeting with the translators, interpreters yesterday, and they explained to me that they need you to speak at a not too fast speed, so they are able to provide interpretation with the quality they want to deliver, and we request. So if you can, please. I know I'm very harsh on the time limits. We have a very loaded work program, but nevertheless, please try to keep it within a speed that is also good for the interpreters. Thank you very much for considering that. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sri Lanka appreciates the efforts of the government of Nicaragua in advancing the rights to education and health and improving the living condition of its people. Action taken by Nicaragua to mitigate the impact of climate change is also noteworthy. Sri Lanka believes that country-specific initiatives which do not enjoy the consent of the country concerned are not helpful in achieving the objectives of this Council. Such measures are against the universal principles of respect for integrity, sovereignty, and non-interference in the internal affairs of states as enshrined in the UN Charter. Sri Lanka reiterates that the mandate of this Council needs to be operated through genuine dialogue in order to achieve meaningful advances in human rights. It is also recalled that the UNGA Resolution 60/251 that sets up this Council recognizes the importance of ensuring universality, objectivity, and non-selectivity in the consideration of human rights issues and the elimination of double standards and politicization. We therefore encourage the Council to engage with the government of Nicaragua in a constructive approach to safeguard the human rights of its people. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
President, Zimbabwe reaffirms its position against the adoption and implementation of politically motivated council resolutions that target specific countries. This approach is counterproductive, and it ignores the concerns of the targeted country and seeks to impose solutions on a government that has a key role in the promotion and protection of the human rights of its people. We call on the Council to prioritize a genuine, constructive, and non-politicized dialogue with the government of Nicaragua, and that such dialogue should be guided by the principles of objectivity, impartiality, non-selectivity, and non-interference in the affairs of the state. The dialogue should hinge on cooperation to support and strengthen the country's efforts towards fulfilling its human rights obligations. Zimbabwe condemns the continued application of unilateral coercive measures which have a devastating impact on Nicaragua's development efforts and the full enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights by its people. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen by video.
Mr. President, the Republic of Yemen expresses its appreciation to the OHCHR for its report and to the group of HR experts for the oral update, and commends the efforts of the government of Nicaragua in promoting human rights and its initiatives to empower women and promote their participation in public life. We commend the government of Nicaragua's efforts in terms of health and education. We urge Nicaragua to create a free and safe environment for journalists and activists, and to continue working towards guaranteeing the right to peaceful assembly and free expression, which contributes to strengthening democracy and protecting civil rights. We are confident that Nicaragua will continue its efforts in promoting and protecting human rights and meeting the aspirations of its people. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Mr. President, Ukraine appreciates the comprehensive report presented and expresses its deep concern regarding the ongoing systematic and widespread human rights violation in Nicaragua. The alarming constitutional reforms that concentrate excessive power in the hands of the executive undermine democratic principles and dismantle institutional checks and balances. The erosion of judicial independence and the instrumentalization of state institutions for political persecution further exacerbate the country's crisis. The suppression of civil society, the closure of independent media, and the arbitrary revocation of legal status of the thousands of non-profit organizations illustrate the government's intent to eliminate dissent. Particularly disturbing are the increasing cases of politically motivated arbitrary detentions, enforced disappearances, and the documented use of torture, including sexual violences, against those demand opponents of the government. Additionally, Nicaragua's continued disregard of international law is evident in its maintenance of so-called honorary consulate of Nicaragua in the temporarily occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea, in violation of UN General Assembly resolutions and fundamental principle of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ukraine stands with the international community in calling for full accountability for those responsible for crimes against humanity and urges Nicaragua to cooperate with international mechanisms. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor.
While arbitrary detentions, forced disappearances, the persecution of dissent, and violation of fundamental freedoms still persist in full impunity. We ask the authorities to cease all harms, grant reparations, and ensure the respect of human rights for all Nicaraguans. Recently, the UN Committee on Human Rights found that Nicaragua violated Articles 6 and 7 of the ICCPR. We uphold the committee's request to the authorities to combat sexual violence, ensure comprehensive health education and services for girls, and guarantee effective access to remedies for victims. Last November, Nicaraguan authorities participated in the UPR process. Yet, they continue to deny the access to the country and to refuse the cooperation with human rights monitoring mechanisms. We've taken note with regret of Nicaragua's choice to disengage from the Council, and we hope this to be reconsidered. Esteemed experts, are there any prospects of change within the justice system in Nicaragua, bearing in mind its fundamental role in the restoration of democracy? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Mr. President, the Human Rights Council and its mechanisms should be guided by constructive dialogue and cooperation based on the principles of non-politicization and non-selectivity, and considering the concerns of the concerned states. Reports and approaches that are prepared in a biased manner add no value to the Human Rights Council's mandate of supporting states in promoting human rights. Instead, they deepen the gap between the states and the Council and its mechanisms, ultimately undermining the effectiveness of the Council's work in a counterproductive manner. The people of Nicaragua have the right to determine their own national policies. They should not be subjected to hardship due to external pressures and foreign interference. Their fundamental human rights, particularly their economic, social, and cultural rights, should not be jeopardized by the imposition of unilateral coercive measures. Despite the pressures caused by external interference, the Nicaraguan government has demonstrated its independent will to uphold the right of its people to self-determination, safeguard its national sovereignty, and protect the human rights of its citizens. This must be fully respected. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué représentant du Burkina Faso.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Burkina Faso salue l'engagement du Nicaragua à promouvoir et protéger les droits de l'homme sur son territoire. Ma délégation salue les efforts consentis par le gouvernement du Nicaragua en vue d'améliorer les conditions de vie des populations à travers, entre autres, le renforcement des services sociaux de base tels que l'éducation, la santé, le logement, ainsi que la mise en place d'une politique devant garantir la sécurité alimentaire dans le pays. Mon pays estime que ces efforts méritent d'être reconnus et accompagnés par la communauté internationale dans le strict respect de la souveraineté et des priorités du pays. Ma délégation tient à rappeler que l'imposition de mandats non consensuels et motivée par des considérations politiques est contre-productive et contraire à l'esprit et aux principes fondamentaux du Conseil des droits de l'homme. Enfin, le Burkina Faso appelle à la responsabilité du Conseil des droits de l'homme quant à la nécessité de promouvoir un climat de dialogue sincère et co-constructif, seule condition capable d'instaurer la confiance et de garantir la pleine coopération entre les États et les mécanismes des droits de l'homme. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Nous passons à la liste des institutions nationales des droits de l'homme et des organisations non gouvernementales. Et je donne la parole à Right Livelihood Award Foundation par vidéo.
Mr. President, the Right Livelihood thanks the group of human rights experts for their report and for the attention given to indigenous peoples. By allowing illegal cattle breeding, logging, and mining by the colonos on indigenous lands, the Nicaragua government is an accomplice in human rights violations. They are bringing the indigenous and Afro-descendant communities on the Caribbean coast on the brink of ethnocide. In 2024, only over 1,000 human rights violations were reported, including widespread violence and documented cases of abduction targeting specifically women and girls. This has led to widespread forced displacement. We condemn that, instead of standing by its obligation and promptly investigating the crimes, the government continues the suppression of critical voices, targeting human rights defenders inside and outside Nicaragua. And it has engaged in a campaign to strip indigenous peoples of their land rights. Besides establishing parallel authorities in previously protected lands, the recent constitutional reform has restricted self-determination rights, the exercise of autonomy, and the right to communal property and natural resources. Mr. President, as the repression intensifies and the government succeeds in suppressing critical voices, the group of experts is vital in documenting Nicaragua's continually deteriorating human rights situations to ensure that justice is ultimately served. We therefore urge the Council to renew the mandate of the GRAN, strengthening its provisions on indigenous people and ensuring that they are provided with adequate resources to fulfill their fundamental role. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Center for Justice and International Law, also by video.
Excelencias, desde SEGIL y la Unidad de Defensa Jurídica agradecemos el trabajo del Grupo de Expertos en Derechos Humanos sobre Nicaragua. Valoramos sus conclusiones y recomendaciones, en particular aquellas relativas al impacto de las decisiones internacionales sobre el acceso de recursos del gobierno en un escenario donde la reciente reforma constitucional concentra el poder del Ejecutivo y restringe libertades fundamentales. Observamos con profunda preocupación la situación de las 47 personas presas políticas en Nicaragua y el patrón reforzado de desapariciones forzadas con 12 víctimas registradas. En particular, alertamos sobre el caso de Jaime Navarrete, preso político desde hace 7 años, cuya salud se ha deteriorado gravemente en un contexto de hostigamiento y aislamiento. En este sentido, quisiéramos conocer el nivel de implementación de las recomendaciones del grupo de expertos. Finalmente, instamos respetuosamente al Consejo a renovar el mandato del GREM por 2 años y a redoblar los esfuerzos para garantizar la liberación de las personas presas políticas y su acceso a la justicia a nivel nacional e internacional. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Protestant Agency for Diaconia and Development.
Buenas tardes. Como miembro del colectivo de Derechos Humanos Nicaragua Nunca Más, agradecemos al Consejo su labor frente a la mayor crisis de derechos humanos en nuestra historia reciente. El retiro de Nicaragua del Consejo de Derechos Humanos es de suma preocupación, ya que esperan que retirándose de todo espacio de disertación política o derechos humanos, sus crímenes sigan en impunidad. Con la salida de este Consejo, de la Organización de Estados Americanos y la ruptura diplomática con 6 estados, pretenden impedir que la comunidad internacional siga denunciando la ruptura del orden constitucional, la imposición de un estado de excepción de facto y una política de torturas y destierros. Tan solo nuestra organización ha documentado 229 casos de tortura y 161 personas apátridas de facto, caracterizada por destierros silenciosos y selectivos, impedimento de ingreso a Nicaragua, o la negativa de entregarles sus documentos, sentenciando a muerte civil a miles de nicaragüenses. Agradecemos el informe del grupo de expertos y hoy más que nunca es necesaria la renovación de su mandato, al igual que el del alto comisionado. Además, hacemos un llamado para activar a la Corte Penal Internacional, cuya jurisdicción le permite investigar los crímenes extraterritoriales, como la deportación y persecución, los cuales se han terminado de cometer en estados parte del Estatuto de Roma. Hoy más que nunca no debemos callar. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Aula Abierta.
Buenas tardes, señor presidente y miembros del Consejo. Junto a Reed y la Red Pro de Paz Nicaragua denunciamos la continuación de la política de Estado contra la libertad académica y la autonomía universitaria en Nicaragua. En 2025 hemos documentado denuncias sobre la radicalización del adoctrinamiento político institucionalizado en las universidades, las cuales han sufrido por años injerencia del Ejecutivo a través del Consejo Nacional de Universidades, consolidados con reformas que eliminaron su autonomía. Esta realidad se agrava con la reciente reforma constitucional promovida por el Ejecutivo y aprobada por la Asamblea Nacional, que subordina derechos fundamentales a los valores supremos de paz y seguridad, concepto indeterminado utilizado arbitrariamente para justificar violaciones de derechos humanos. Así, la producción y difusión de conocimiento crítico en ejercicio de la libertad académica quedan en riesgo y en extinción forzada. La reforma también establece que quienes promueven la injerencia extranjera serán considerados traidores a la patria y perderán su nacionalidad, aumentando el riesgo de privación arbitraria de la nacionalidad para defensores de derechos humanos, universitarios y críticos del Estado que participan en instancias internacionales, como ha ocurrido a más de 400 nicaragüenses. Estas reformas también generan graves preocupaciones sobre el Estado de Derecho y los grupos vulnerables como los pueblos indígenas y afrodescendientes. Instamos a los Estados a exigir al Estado de Nicaragua el cumplimiento de sus obligaciones internacionales. Asimismo, urgimos la renovación del mandato del grupo experto en derechos humanos.
My remark on the speed of your statement also concerns civil society representatives. Of course, please respect that. I give the floor to International Federation for Human Rights Leagues.
Gracias, presidente. En nombre de la FIDH, de Urnas Abiertas y del CENID, agradecemos el importante informe del grupo de expertos que da cuenta de cómo se ha ido consolidando una maquinaria unificada de represión en Nicaragua bajo el control de Daniel Ortega y Rosario Murillo. Desde hace casi 7 años, Nicaragua atraviesa una profunda crisis que, lejos de mejorar, ha intensificado las políticas estatales de represión. En estos años, el país también ha experimentado un deterioro en los índices de transparencia, evidenciando un modelo de corrupción sistémica que no solo ha limitado el acceso a servicios y derechos de la ciudadanía, sino que ha reforzado ese sistema de represión. A inicios de 2025 se aprobó una reforma constitucional que destruye el Estado de Derecho, y el retiro de Nicaragua de este Consejo es una prueba más de la falta de voluntad del Estado de Nicaragua de querer solventar esta grave crisis. Por ello, el acompañamiento a las víctimas y a la sociedad civil nicaragüense, así como el monitoreo por parte de la comunidad internacional, es aún más fundamental y necesario. Así, respaldamos las recomendaciones del grupo de expertos, entre otras la rendición de cuentas de los responsables de violaciones y crímenes documentados, y que los estados e instituciones financieras internacionales incluyan garantías de derechos humanos en proyectos de cooperación e inversión. Instamos a este Consejo a aprobar la extensión de ambos mandatos por 2 años más. Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Peace Brigades International.
Gracias, señor presidente. Estimados miembros del Consejo de Derechos Humanos, soy Wilmer Gutiérrez, Ortega de Nicaragua. Quisiera externar la preocupación de los pueblos indígenas y afrodescendientes por la aprobación de una constitución considerada lesiva para nuestros pueblos. Nicaragua es signataria del convenio 169, sin embargo, la nueva constitución carece del proceso de libre información previa informada hacia los pueblos. Nicaragua celebra 200 años de independencia y pese a varias iniciativas no hay una ley que tutela los derechos de los pueblos indígenas del Pacífico centro y norte del país. Nuestros pueblos aún demandan justicia por la Navidad Roja. La invasión de colonos sobre los territorios titulados causa muerte, desplazamiento y exilio. Desde el año 2015 hasta la fecha se reportan más de 80 comunitarios asesinados. El Estado de Nicaragua tampoco ha cumplido con el proceso del saneamiento establecido en la Ley 445 ni el ejercicio efectivo de la autonomía. Dicho esto, Nicaragua necesita de un marco jurídico estable que no sea manipulable ni socave la integridad de los pueblos indígenas y afrodescendientes en el país. Toda constitución debe de respetar los derechos de estos pueblos que existen antes del Estado de Nicaragua. Estos derechos son imprescriptibles. Agradecemos el trabajo del grupo de expertos y solicitamos la continuidad de su mandato. Muchísimas gracias, presidente.
Thank you. I give the floor to World Organization Against Torture.
Mi nombre es Eugenia Valle Olivares, esposa de Víctor Boitano Coleman, ciudadano italo-nicaragüense, que fue arrestado en nuestra vivienda el 23 de abril del 2024 por parte de agentes armados y policías. Los policías no contaban con orden judicial. Desde ese día que irrumpieron violentamente en nuestro domicilio, desconocemos su paradero. Durante 6 meses me dediqué a la búsqueda de mi esposo en distintos centros de reclusión. Sin embargo, ninguna autoridad nos proporcionó información sobre su paradero y estado de salud. Ante las amenazas y persecución que sufrí por parte de agentes estatales, como resultado de la búsqueda de mi esposo, tuve que abandonar el país. Desde entonces me encuentro en exilio. Pese al temor y desesperación que vivimos, quienes tenemos a nuestros familiares desaparecidos y detenidos, hoy vengo ante el Consejo de Derechos Humanos a alzar mi voz en nombre de esas 47 familias de presos políticos que han y siguen siendo torturados en las cárceles de Nicaragua. Les pedimos seguir fortaleciendo todos los mecanismos necesarios como el grupo de expertos para que algún día podamos regresar a Nicaragua y vivir sin miedo. Exigimos fe de vida de mi esposo Víctor Boitano, así como de Angélica Chavarría y Brooklyn Rivera. Exigimos que se haga cumplir al gobierno de Nicaragua las medidas cautelares y las medidas provisionales que se han instado en la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to International Service for Human Rights.
Buenas tardes. Tras la reforma constitucional entrada en vigor el 19 de febrero en Nicaragua, todas las garantías ciudadanas han sido canceladas, incluido el derecho al recurso de habeas corpus, el principio de legalidad penal, el derecho a no sufrir torturas, y se ha eliminado toda disposición que refiera a la dignidad de la persona humana y su respeto, un principio jurídico de la humanidad por más de 75 años. El espacio cívico se ha cerrado y criminalizado. Hoy hay 47 personas presas políticas en las cárceles desprovistos de todo tipo de derechos. De estas, Fabiola Tercero, Brooklyn Rivera, Nancy Enríquez, Leo Cárcamo y otros activistas se encuentran en estado de desaparición forzada. Manuel Urbina, Jaime Navarrete y Marvin Vargas continúan en la cárcel a pesar de que han cumplido sus condenas. La prisión política se utiliza para imponer el miedo a la ciudadanía y a los presos políticos como ficha de negociación. Asimismo, centenares de activistas sufren restricciones de movimiento. Deben presentarse diariamente a estaciones policiales sin orden judicial ni juicio previo. En los primeros 2 meses de 2025, más de 200 ciudadanos han sido impedidos de regresar al país, convirtiéndolos en apátridas de facto. El Estado de Nicaragua incumple de forma deliberada así sus obligaciones internacionales. Miembros del grupo de expertos, agradecemos su invaluable trabajo desde la concertación democrática. ¿Cómo podemos desde la sociedad civil colaborar para asegurar la continuidad de su mandato? ¿Cuáles son los obstáculos a la implementación de sus recomendaciones, en especial sobre las instituciones financieras internacionales y el apoyo internacional a la sociedad civil? Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Cívicos.
Estimados miembros del Consejo de Derechos Humanos y del Grupo de Expertos, la nueva constitución impuesta por el gobierno de Nicaragua, que reforma más del 60% de los artículos, no fue consultada a la ciudadanía, por lo que carece de legitimidad. El artículo 45 de dicha constitución restringe el derecho a la libertad de asociación, obligando a las organizaciones a integrar en sus naturalezas y fines los llamados principios fundamentales. Preocupa que el gobierno de Nicaragua pretenda poner a los instrumentos internacionales subordinados a la Constitución, como lo señala el artículo 182. El gobierno de Nicaragua continúa cerrando el espacio cívico del país, Esto ha significado el cierre arbitrario del 80% de las organizaciones existentes. Muchos de los programas de desarrollo y atención de los grupos vulnerables no han sido sustituidos por el Estado. Han expropiado el patrimonio de las organizaciones y sus miembros continúan siendo criminalizados. Por tal motivo, el Cívicos Monitor considera como cerrado el espacio cívico de la sociedad civil en Nicaragua. Por último, pedimos la liberación inmediata de al menos 8 guardabosques indígenas y defensores del territorio que fueron detenidos y condenados de forma arbitraria por el gobierno de Nicaragua. Agradecemos el trabajo riguroso y sistemático del grupo de expertos y de la Oficina del Alto Comisionado. Consideramos necesario la continuidad de su mandato y solicitamos el respaldo de los Estados. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Ingénieur du Monde, also by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to express gratitude for the work of the United Nations Group of Experts on Nicaragua. Their latest report is a milestone in exposing the full scale of repression. For the first time, it is explicitly recognized that the Nicaraguan army played a direct role in the violent crackdown of the protests, engaging in extrajudicial executions and providing intelligence and weapons to paramilitary groups. This is a truth that other human rights organizations and I have denounced for years. At least 450 of us have been stripped of our nationality, but the real number of stateless Nicaraguans is far higher. Thousands have been denied re-entry to our own country. And religious persecution also continues. Over 50% of the Catholic clergy has been forced into exile, and entire Protestant communities are also being harassed. Ortega continues to shut down independent organizations while confiscating private properties. The newly imposed constitution has dismantled the separation of powers, abolishing fundamental human rights protections and cementing a grotesque concentration of power in the so-called co-presidency. This council must go beyond documentation. I respectfully urge this body to explore alternative international mechanisms to hold perpetrators accountable.
Merci. C'était la dernière intervention qui nous est possible d'écouter. Je donne maintenant la parole au groupe d'experts pour leurs remarques finales. Il vous reste 8 minutes 35 secondes. Et je comprends que c'est Madame Ariela Peralta qui va prendre la parole. S'il vous plaît, Madame.
Agradecemos a todos los estados intervinientes y por razones, y agradecemos las preguntas. Por razones de tiempo me voy a referir a algunas y mi colega Reed Bródy se va a referir a otras. Respecto a la pregunta del Estado de Alemania, para nosotros es importante que se lleven a cabo diligencias debidas y exhaustivas que incluyan evaluaciones de impactos sobre los derechos humanos antes de invertir o conceder préstamos a entidades en Nicaragua utilizando nuestros informes y otras fuentes fiables, y que la ayuda financiera o los préstamos se condicionen a mejoras en el récord de derechos humanos en el país. Ante la pregunta del Estado de Rumania sobre el sistema de justicia, la reciente reforma constitucional subordina el sistema de justicia a la presidencia, formalizando la cooptación de los tribunales y el Ministerio Público por parte del Ejecutivo a través de los secretarios políticos del Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional colocados en sus filas. Ya el Poder Judicial estaba cooptado por el Poder Ejecutivo. Esta Constitución viene a formalizar y el Grupo de Trabajo ha documentado todas las líneas de actuación que dan órdenes a través de los secretarios políticos a la Procuraduría y a los distintos tribunales de justicia. En este sentido, las perspectivas no son alentadoras. Por eso el Grupo urge a la comunidad internacional a tomar acciones concretas que mi colega Reed Bródy va a explicar con más detalles. Para el Grupo, en relación a la pregunta del espacio académico que hizo Bélgica, los Países Bajos y Luxemburgo, para el Grupo actualmente una medida importante es que los estados, en los casos en que se encuentran exiliados nicaragüenses o con otro estatus legal, y en esos países en que hay estudiantes que no han podido acceder a su récord universitario, profesores que se han quedado sin salario y o pensiones. Entonces, que los estados proporcionen soluciones creativas que permitan a estas personas continuar sus estudios, se les reconozcan sus títulos profesionales o récord universitarios, que puedan reiniciar su trabajo académico, que puedan obtener becas u otros medios de vida para fortalecerles y fortalecer la futura independencia académica y entonces esas juventudes para el retorno a la democracia en Nicaragua. Sobre la pregunta de Irlanda sobre el impacto de la desnacionalización, tenemos que considerar que el grupo de trabajo considera la desnacionalización una suerte de muerte civil, ¿verdad? Hablamos de apatridia de derecho o de apatridia de facto para personas que de hecho están sin documentación y sin derechos como nacionales, y esta desnacionalización implica la violación conexa de otros derechos. Entre otros, voy a nombrar solo algunos: participación en los asuntos públicos, libertad de circulación y escoger la residencia, violación de la personalidad jurídica y violación a los derechos de las niñas y niños. La desnacionalización ha implicado, por casos documentados por el grupo, la imposibilidad de reunificación familiar de padres con niños y niñas, las violaciones por extensión a los familiares y a las personas que aún quedan en el territorio de Nicaragua y la muerte económica de estas personas por la confiscación de todos sus bienes. Cómo ayudar a la sociedad civil también lo va a abordar mi colega, pero un aspecto importante es lo que ya iniciamos diciendo en nuestro statement, que es el apoyo con ayuda económica y técnica para que la sociedad civil, que está dispersa y atomizada por la represión, pueda fortalecerse para una transición y un retorno lo antes posible a la democracia en Nicaragua. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. As we state in our report, the international community must not simply bear witness, but take concrete measures to hold the government and the individual perpetrators accountable. To answer Spain's question about accountability, if there is one thing we would advocate, it would be for a state or a group of states to hold Nicaragua accountable at the International Court of Justice under the Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness. There is no country in the world today that practices arbitrary deprivation of nationality for political reasons on the scale that Nicaragua does. The new Constitution explicitly provides for the revocation of nationality for those deemed traitors to the homeland. Who are those 453 people already called traitors? 7 opposition political candidates, one of whom we just heard from, former Sandinista heroes, former Vice President Sergio Ramirez, journalists, community leaders. All of them have also been expelled from Nicaragua, except for one, Donna Vilma Núñez, at 86 years old, the dean of the Nicaraguan human rights community, who remains in Managua, stripped of her citizenship, her property, her pension, and her law license. As Nicaragua's withdrawal yesterday from the Council shows, the government has nothing but disdain for international monitoring mechanisms. But the ICJ is a forum that Nicaragua cannot dismiss or discredit. Since its historic case against the United States in 1984, no country has brought more cases to the ICJ than Nicaragua. Its record at the court is a rightful source of national pride for the Nicaraguan government. A case at the ICJ would have real meaning. The evidence of statelessness is irrefutable, found in government decrees, official orders, and now in the Constitution itself. And the ICJ can order provisional measures that would have real-time impact on the situation. Turning to Switzerland's question on support for human rights defenders, the abrupt termination of a major source of foreign assistance has severely undermined Nicaraguans striving to hold their government accountable, including exiled human rights activists, independent journalists and activists. Many Nicaraguans, NGOs who had planned to attend this session had to cancel their participation. And the Nicaraguan government lost no time in celebrating. State-controlled media gleefully reported that, and I quote, Donald Trump turned off the faucet to the terrorists. This is a moment for other states to urgently step up and fill the gap to support those courageous Nicaraguans who continue to stand up for fundamental rights. Many delegations have asked about the new Constitution. Under that Constitution, the co-presidents have enhanced powers to suspend rights in a state of emergency, summon the military to take on police actions, and deploy the new so-called voluntary police, who this month took their oaths with their faces masked. Among other provisions, the reform deletes the explicit constitutional prohibition of torture and eliminates the ban on censorship of the press. In conclusion, Nicaragua has become a place of surveillance and enforced silence for those who remain, while those who dare to resist or who are merely suspected of doing so face a life of statelessness and exile. Thank you.
Merci. Ceci nous amène à la fin de ce dialogue interactif. Je tiens à remercier les membres du groupe d'experts des droits de l'homme sur le Nicaragua pour leur participation. Nous faisons une courte pause avant de commencer le dialogue interactif sur la mise à jour orale du haut-commissaire sur la situation des droits de l'homme au Myanmar. Merci.